In the late 19th century, Africa was not empty, it was not silent, and it was not waiting to be discovered. It was a vast continent of ancient kingdoms, complex societies, thriving trade networks, and millions of people living lives deeply rooted in culture, land, and history. Yet, in the winter of 1884, thousands of miles away from Africa itself, a small group of European men gathered in a grand room in Berlin, and in a matter of months, they would redraw the fate of an entire continent. This is the story of the Berlin Conference, and how Africa was carved up without a single African voice in the room. By the late 1800s, Europe was changing rapidly. Factories roared with machines, cities expanded, industries demanded raw materials, rubber, palm oil, gold, ivory, and minerals. At the same time, European nations competed fiercely for power, prestige, and global dominance. Colonies became symbols of national greatness. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and others all wanted a piece of Africa. But there was a problem. Competition was becoming dangerous. European powers feared that rival claims in Africa could spark wars back home. So instead of fighting on African soil, they decided to negotiate over it. The conference was called by Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany. Germany was a new empire, eager to assert itself among older colonial powers. Bismarck presented the conference as a peaceful solution, a way to regulate trade, prevent conflict, and bring order to Africa. But beneath the polished speeches and diplomatic smiles was one clear goal: control. From November 1884 to February 1885, representatives from 14 countries met in Berlin. Not one African leader, scholar, or representative was invited. Africa was discussed like unclaimed land. Its people were treated as an afterthought. Inside the conference halls, maps of Africa were spread across tables. Rivers became borders. Straight lines were drawn through forests, deserts, and villages, often by men who had never set foot on the continent. Ethnic groups were split apart. Historic rivals were forced together. Natural borders were ignored. The conference introduced a principle called effective occupation. This meant a European power could claim African territory if it showed control through military presence, administration, or economic activity. In practice, this encouraged rapid invasion and conquest. Africa suddenly became a race. Perhaps the most chilling outcome of the Berlin Conference involved King Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold did not claim land for Belgium, but for himself personally. He convinced Europe that he was bringing civilization and humanitarian aid to Central Africa. In reality, the Congo Free State became one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history. Under Leopold's rule, millions of Congolese were forced into labor to extract rubber and ivory. Villages were destroyed. Families were mutilated. Death became routine. All of this was legalized and legitimized by agreements made in Berlin. European leaders justified their actions with the language of the time: civilizing missions, Christianity, progress. But behind these words were exploitation and violence. African political systems were dismantled. Traditional economies were reshaped to serve European markets. Education, where provided, was designed to create obedience, not empowerment. Colonial rule did not develop Africa for Africans. It developed Africa for Europe. Yet, Africa did not submit quietly. Across the continent, resistance movements rose. From the Zulu Kingdom in southern Africa to Samurai Touré in West Africa to the Ethiopian Empire, Africans fought back with courage and determination. Ethiopia, under Emperor Menelik II, famously defeated Italy in 1896, becoming a symbol of African resistance and independence. in an era of conquest. Though many resistance efforts were crushed, they proved one thing: Africa was not conquered because it was weak, but because Europe was technologically and militarily overwhelming. The Berlin Conference officially ended in 1885, but its consequences did not. The borders drawn in Europe became the borders of modern African nations, often unstable, often contested. Many of today's political conflicts, ethnic tensions, and economic struggles trace their roots back to those arbitrary lines. Colonial economies left African nations dependent on exporting raw materials. Political systems were inherited without the foundations needed to sustain them. Independence in the mid-20th century removed colonial flags, but not colonial damage. The scramble for Africa was not ancient history. It was a turning point whose effects are still unfolding. Understanding the Berlin Conference means understanding why borders don't always make sense, why wealth extraction continues under new forms, why historical injustice cannot be ignored. It reminds us that global inequality did not happen by accident, it was designed. The Berlin Conference ended in 1885. The men stood up, shook hands, and returned home. On paper, the matter was settled. But in Africa, the story was only beginning. The borders they drew would outlive them. The systems they imposed would shape generations. And the damage they set in motion would echo far beyond the colonial era. Because the scramble for Africa did not end with independence. It simply changed its form. The question is no longer who drew the lines, but who still benefits from them today. And that is a story we haven't finished telling.